So I also want to go back to the Freudenberg study in one area, because he had this point about these areas had to be rural to be in his study. And it turns out that upstate New York is not rural enough. And I think there are regions that are that rural, but a place like Tompkins County, for instance, has Ithaca, it's got Cornell, it's got various other things, and that may make it not as rural as some of these areas he was looking at.
Bill, one question, as long as you're talking about rural, that I'm interested to see how comparative these studies are to actually upstate New York, is one, population density of Wyoming is nowhere near any place near here, upstate New York. And also, our economies are vastly different.
Right.
So, how
exactly
they apply here?
Yeah.
Is that for
that's the whole question, is how much they apply here. And for that, we need an expert economist to start taking a look at the data. I'm just not seeing them out there talking about this. But my point, as I said, was the Headwaters results showed that, as far as I can tell, Western economies are more like ours than they used to be, and the results are less good than they used to be. So I'm worried. Doesn't prove anything. And here is a similar effect. He threw out studies that weren't rural enough. So he went up with 301, but before that he had 380 something. And his last criterion was they had to be rural, and he threw out 62 studies because they weren't rural enough. They were from places like upstate New York, specifically mentioned in the paragraph. He threw out 62 studies because they weren't rural enough, because he was afraid they would cloud his results. And it turns out that he did report what the results were of those studies. And they were actually worse than in the ones he kept. Only 11 of the 62 had positive results in these mixed areas. And again, he doesn't talk about it at all, doesn't say why. And they may not all be comparable to here, but what I'm worried about is that a place exactly like Tompkins County that is a more mixed economy, that does rely on lots of other revenue streams, might be particularly vulnerable to the negative impacts of gas drilling that may not be as relevant in a very rural town. So I think for me, that's food for thought and a reason for caution.
Bill, does anybody at Cornell taken it upon themselves to make some kind of projection study about the university itself? I mean, it's such a big part of our economy here, and I can't imagine that's not going to be affected.
No, not that I'm aware of. I mean, there is an economist who's working on upstate New York, I believe, on a study, but nothing specific for Cornell. Certainly many faculty have raised the concern of what this might do to the long-term prospects for the university if the area becomes less desirable to live in, both in terms of attracting good faculty and attracting good students. But that's, I think a very reasonable concern, but there's no hard and fast numbers on any of that.
So, does anyone discuss health effects? The long-range health effects?
Yeah, no. Again, most of these reports, either they're saying, here's what we're seeing. I think a health effect is sadly needed. A good public health survey of, because we know certain things, like in the oil refining areas of Louisiana, there's a particularly high incidence of cancer. Okay, so that's established. But no one has done a comparable study for gas drilling areas. Maybe there's no problems. Maybe there are problems. I think it's an excellent fodder. Some of it, unfortunately, we won't know the answers for because some of the chemicals being used are used relatively recently. And as we have heard, if you were at the TC3 forum, some of them may have effects at extremely low doses. And so how do you model that without waiting the 20 years for it to happen? And that, again, this is only economics. There are, at least 10 sides to this issue that have, tough questions and tough answers to. And one thing I'm scared about is we don't know the answer for 20 years from now on health. And so how much risk do we run in the meantime?
Well, I'm just looking at those two things together because health effects do affect the economy. So, I've asked this question a couple of times. If there are, not to you, but to others, if there's a way to look at the long-term health effects on the economy, because I think that would be something that's worth looking at. Even if you had to model it off of something like the areas in Louisiana or that sort of thing.
I think these are important questions. The problem probably comes down to that there hasn't been money to do the study. I don't know why things like this haven't been answered yet, and some things are. And there may be answers out there that we haven't come across. Like, again, this Freudenberg study, part of what that says to me is there's a huge body of research on what mining does to communities that, as far as I can tell, most people are unaware of. And it's kind of like what went on with global warming and the ozone hole and even smoking. That for the scientific community knows an answer a long time before that percolates into public policy. And so researchers in the 70s and 80s start picking up that in foreign countries where a lot of resource extraction was taking place, which they were thinking this is going to be the way they're going to get themselves out of their problems. They found that they actually were worse and worse and worse rather than better and better and better. And then they said, well, geez, what about the U.S.? And so now in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, a lot of research on the U.S. has been done, and lo and behold, I mean, think of places like Appalachia that have had coal mining for 200 years. That's one of the poorest areas of the country, not one of the wealthiest. So unfortunately, it's hard to literally dig yourself out of an economic hole, that there must be some reason why that is, and it may be complex, but I do think these negative impacts on other important industries is one of them. And so this chart, which I've developed a bit from stuff that John Schwartz pulled out the numbers together to get this stuff, is that there is money in gas. No doubt about it. As I'm trying to say, with the Penn State report, there's no doubt the gas companies are spending money. There's no doubt that there are bonus payments going to lenders. There's no doubt they will earn royalties on the money. The question is, what's the net impact of all of that plus the drilling activity? And if you can just take this money and stick it on top, as Tony was suggesting, then okay, what's the big deal? But the concern is that maybe you can't do that. That maybe some of these things get hurt when you start putting all these wells in, either because people get sick more, or because they don't want to come there and fish and hunt anymore, or don't want to go to the wineries anymore, or you can fill your things in. And I can't swear to you that people won't come here if there's gas drilling going on. But looking at other places where gas drilling has taken place, it looks like the net benefit is questionable. And so I think we need to ask some really hard questions if that's the way we want to go. So
for the 50 years of the term.
And there's one question of what's the lifetime of a well? 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 years, but it takes some time to develop it. So how long is this activity taking place? Again, those are good questions. How fast is it really going to develop? If it develops slower or faster, is that better or worse? All excellent questions.
You want to rip the Band-Aid off fast or slow?
Is it worth the risk? Is it what we have to do because there's no other alternatives? One thing I didn't have time to slip in here, and we are kind of at the end of our time anyway, is that one thing about mining, certainly gas drilling, other oil drilling, it's very capital intensive. It takes a lot of equipment to do, and not necessarily so much labor. Way less labor than it used to because of all the automation that's taken place. And so your jobs return per investment dollar are actually pretty low compared to other things. I think the Penn State report came up with like 6 to 8 jobs per $1 million. Environmental Advocates recently did a study of a green jobs initiative where if money was put on improving energy efficiency and all this kind of stuff, and I will tell you I'm remembering this off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure it was more like 20 or 30 jobs per $1 million invested. The hard question is, where does that $1 million come from? Right? When it's gas drilling, Wall Street's footing the bill. So can we make the same pitch to Wall Street that this really is the right thing to invest in? I'm really concerned about the impacts gas drilling is going to have on this community. One of them is on the economy. But I am realistic that I can't just say, well, geez, we're going to spend that same amount of money some other way. I know that money's coming because the gas companies know they're going to make a bundle of money on this. Okay? At least they hope they are. And there's a whole other talk to give on at what cost does gas have to be to make this profitable, and is this all a shell game where they're just gaining investment dollars and they're going to walk away from it. But that's a whole other topic, as is the whole topic of taxes and how the taxes get distributed and whether you should have a severance tax or not and how much comes back to the local municipalities. That's a whole other ball of wax too. So question back there.
Yeah, I was just going to mention the states are all kind of chomping at the bit looking at the additional revenue they're going to get, but what happens when the property values decline and they're not getting as much real estate tax, and businesses leave and people leave, so they're not getting as much income tax. So yeah, that was just...
I mean, when in Dish, Texas, there has been a problem with property values going down and therefore property taxes the money isn't there. In Sublette County, I think that real estate values went up. The median home price went up dramatically during this boom phase. So again, it's unclear. It may depend a bit on what the perceptions of the people are. Again, my view, upstate New York, which is known for the lakes and the beauty and the hills and stuff, is much more likely to suffer a negative property valuation, but I don't know that. That's my guess based on why people are here.
Yeah, and where those values were at the beginning, like if it's, $500 an acre.
Yeah. And I will also say, that value for Sublette County was also 2000, 2005, which is kind of like during the housing whole thing. So it may just also be reflecting national trends that, that was before the bubble burst on housing. And so maybe they aren't having such great times on housing prices. And housing prices going up is great if you own your house. If you're trying to buy a house, it's terrible. Rentals also went up more than a factor of 2 over about 7 years. So if you're renting, then this can also have a dramatic impact on your out-of-pocket spending, which again is one of those things. When prices go up, that's a brake on the economy. So it's not just the money coming in, which goes to certain people who have leased, but everyone has maybe more to spend on money, on food or on clothing or whatever. And so what is the net impact? The bottom line is what's the net impact, not just, oh, there is some extra money coming in.